All right, first things first, I put the Kahoot game up that we just played. And so you go into lecture, you go into the first module, and then you go into that study tools folder. And it's right there below the 2 practice quizzes for the hormones. Now that's not 3 different Kahoot games. That's the same Kahoot game, but the first link pin combination, you use that one first. So when you click on it, it'll take you to the Kahoot game, and then you just enter in the pin number, or it looks like it actually will just go ahead and let you start. But there's the pin number. If it asks you for the pin number's right there. Okay. Use that one first. Use that link first. But that link, each link I can create for the Kahoot game for you guys to practice with, it allows 100 plays. Okay. Now I'm using the same links for all my Biology 202 classes. So there's a chance that first link may reach the maximum of 100 plays. If you do go to that first link and it says, there's no more plays or whatever, then use these 2 links down here. Okay, they're the same. They're the same game. It's just 3 different links for the same game to play. Okay. So just remember that you have until Sunday to do the quiz. And so, study this study mate, 21 hormones. You can do that as many times as you want. You can take this practice quiz as many times as you want. You can take this practice quiz as many times as you want. And you can play the Kahoot game as many times as you want. Okay. Now, if it does, for some reason, if it does reach, all these guys reach the maximum, then email me and I can make another one. Okay. It's not hard. But you can play those as many times as you want to. Just remember with the actual quiz that it's a one-shot deal. So don't actually start the quiz, the real quiz, until you are ready to take it. And it has a time limit of a half an hour. It's right down here. Okay, so it has a time limit of a half an hour to complete. Is it open now? I thought I put 2:30. Maybe I put 12:30. No, it says 2:30. Okay. But it'll be ready right after we get done here today, and you have until Sunday to take it. So don't take it until you are ready to take it, and then it will grade your score immediately. It won't show you which ones you got wrong or right. Okay, I can't do that yet because I can't have one person take it, get the correct answers, and then give the correct answers to somebody else. But once it is finished, once Sunday at midnight hits, everybody's taking it. Then I can turn that into a practice quiz, and you can take that as many times as you want. Okay. So after you take it for the first time for your grade, then you can take it as many times as you want to. I think with the study mate, with what will be 3 practice quizzes and the Kahoot game, I think you'll be good to go as far as hormones are concerned for the actual test coming up in a couple weeks.
Will our bonus points be applied to the grade of the quiz?
It'll be applied to your test grade.
Okay.
I just hold on to it until test day, and then I add it. I'll let you guys know when that happens. I am going to make a study mate for the blood. Okay, I just need time, and I am going to make a study mate for the heart. So those guys will be done. So I'll give you, you'll have practice games or practice quizzes and stuff like that for those things too. I just need time to create it all. Okay. But we should be able to finish blood today. We may have a little bit to do maybe on Wednesday, and then we'll start on heart. And then, so I anticipate the test being week number 6. We're starting week 4 now. But I think we'll finish up everything next week. Okay, so next week is the 5th week. So we'll do blood this week. We'll start heart this week. We'll finish heart next week. And then the following week, you'll take your test. Okay. And I think it was originally set for like the 4th or 5th week, but we had to push it back because all the snow days and stuff, which is no big deal. we still got plenty of time to finish up everything we need to. So so it basically the test should be ready for you to take at the end of next week, and then you'll have to the following Sunday to finish it. That's kind of how that works. So we're getting close. Okay, so you want to make sure, like I said, I hope that by the time you take this quiz that you'll be good with the hormones. Okay, and then you just got to do the blood and the heart. So the blood the other day we started on, and there is one thing that I wanted to correct. I don't know if you actually wrote it down or if it even matters, but it kind of bothered me. It's not part of your notes, but it's something I said. And the more I thought about it, I was kind of like, that can't be right. I had this little feeling in my head. As soon as I said it, I was like, that can't be right. But I was like, I'll check it out later. I'll get back to them. But it had to do with the temperature of blood. And so let me show you. Let me pull up the PowerPoint here and go to that part. But it's just it's a minor correction, but it was something I thought that can't be right. So I want to make sure that we have the correct answer. But on it's number 4 on your notes. So when you go to number 4 on your notes and then go to part D, it says that blood is 1 degree Celsius higher than measured body temperature. Now I was thinking, and I'm teaching in my AMP1 class. We're doing stuff like the metric system right now, and how you have degrees Celsius, and then you have degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, and 0 degrees Celsius would be freezing, and that's 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Like whenever it's 32 degrees outside, we think, oh, there could be ice, right? And I was thinking 1 degree. Well, 1 degree Celsius is 33 degrees Fahrenheit. But what that doesn't mean that every 1 degree increment is another 30 degrees Fahrenheit. And so what I said, I said, blood is 1 degree Celsius higher than normal body temperature, and that's 33 degrees Fahrenheit. And I was there thinking, there's no way that blood is 33 degrees Fahrenheit more than 98.6. 98.6, because 37 degrees Celsius is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. But I was there thinking, there's no way that blood is, 98.6 plus 33. I was like, there's no way. So as soon as I said that, I was sitting there thinking, that can't be right. And so the more I thought about it, I was like, that was stupid. I just said something. But what it is basically is, if you go up to 38 degrees, so that's blood. Blood is 38 degrees Celsius. And that right there is the same thing as 100.4. Okay. So that is about the temperature of your blood. Okay. It's not 98.6 plus 33. So if you did write something about 33 degrees, just mark that out. That was just me talking out my rear end. But it was just me. It was me thinking about the metric system. Like, well, 1 degree Celsius is 33 degrees Fahrenheit. So, but I think I just got the wires crossed. But anyways, if you ever catch me making a mistake, please let me know. Don't feel like I'm infallible and I know everything. If you ever catch a mistake, please let me know so I can fix it. So that was one I was kind of like, as soon as I said it, I was like, that can't be right. But yeah, that right there is a more accurate. It's about 100.4 ish degrees. That's about how warm your temperature is. Now the measured temperature that we measure is body temperature. That's through a thermometer, and so that's going to be that usually is going to be about 98.6 degrees. And once again, it goes back to the fact that we like to use a freaking different measuring system than everybody else. But usually in science, guys, and don't forget about this, yes, with certain things in the hospital, we will use the imperial system. For example, we do use it for a lot for temperature, right? But usually you're going to use the metric system with other measurements other than temperature. So that's a more accurate 100.4-ish is about how warm blood is if you're talking about Fahrenheit. But it's just a little minor thing. All right, I think we stopped right about at serum. And so albumin, we talked about him. He's the most abundant protein in the blood. And he is going to come into play a little bit later on in a couple places. You'll hear about albumin. And then number 10 says the plasma with the clotting factors removed is serum. So what we're going to get into now is the other components of blood, because those previous stuff was talking more about plasma, like number 9 and number 10. Number 9 and number 10 was kind of focusing more on plasma, where plasma is mostly water. Then you got some proteins, because blood is a colloid, which means it's a protein-rich fluid. So you got different what we call plasma proteins, like your albumin. You got guys called globulins. You got clotting factors. All those guys are in there. And then you can actually remove the clotting factors by using a certain type of blood tube. And it's called a serum separator tube. It's commonly called either the red top tube or the tiger top tube, because it has like a little tiger stripes, like a red and gray tiger stripe looking thing. But they'll use what's called a serum separator tube to remove the clotting factors. And then you got serum, and serum is what you use a lot to test like the chemistry panels, like enzyme levels, ALT, things like that, creatinine levels. And then your electrolyte levels, like your calcium and your sodium, and guys like that, they'll use serum to test for that. Then we get into the other components of blood. So you got your plasma, and then you got what's commonly called blood cells, but I don't like to call them blood cells. The more accurate is formed elements. So formed elements is what we're kind of getting into. And it starts you out with number 11. Okay, number 11 on your notes. It says, what does hemopoiesis mean? Now, this suffix you will see from time to time in A&P. Okay, that means production or the making of. I always associate with production because it starts with the P, and so does production. So poiesis kind of means production or making of, or something like that. Okay, so creation of, whatever. And then hemo is one of the prefixes we use for blood. So you make a little note that whenever you see hemo, you should think blood, or whenever you see hem or hema, or you may even see hemato or hemato. People pronounce it different ways. And so the HEM is sort of like your indicator that is talking about blood. Okay, so hemo, hema, hem, hemato or hemato, whatever. Those guys all mean blood. So what this basically is saying, hemopoiesis means the production of blood. Now, what it's talking about is the formed elements. Okay, so your red blood cells, your white blood cells, and your platelets are all involved in this process called hemopoiesis. Now, if you want to be more specific with your formed elements, you can use a slightly different word. For example, if you're talking about red blood cells, that's called erythropoiesis. That means you're talking about red blood cells specifically. And then white blood cells would be called leukopoiesis. And so hemopoiesis is more of a broad term. It just means you're producing your formed elements. Now, all formed elements are produced in red bone marrow. If you go back to A&P 1, there's two types of bone marrow. You have red bone marrow and you have yellow bone marrow. Yellow bone marrow is fat. Okay, it's when fat occupies the marrow cavity of the bones. Okay, and as you get older, you have a lot of yellow bone marrow. Red bone marrow is the blood making areas of your body. And when you're growing, you do have more red bone marrow when you're a child. And then as you move through adulthood, as you move through life, you lay down a lot of fat, but you still have red bone marrow. We do as adults. We have red bone marrow in certain areas of our body, our sternum, places in our skull, the proximal end of our long bones. So guys like the head of the humerus and the head of the femur, and then your hips. Okay, there's still red bone marrow in those areas. Another word for red bone marrow that you want to know, okay, it's good to know, and I talked to you guys about this before, it's good to know all the names that you might hear for a particular body part. Yes, it sucks that, learning A&P is already tough enough, right? And you're not quite sure which one a book's going to use. But another word for red bone marrow is myeloid tissue. And it's put there, number 11C. I put it there for you because sometimes when you read a book, it might say myeloid tissue. Okay, so myeloid tissue and red bone marrow is essentially talking about the same thing. Now inside there, inside your red bone marrow, you have stem cells that produce the formed elements. They're called hemocytoblasts. Okay, if you break that word down, blast is a word we like to use for stem cells. Okay, like a fibroblast is a cell that produces fibrous tissue. Okay, but a blast basically points you to stem cells. And then hemo means blood, and cyto means cell. So this is basically that word right there basically means the stem cells that produce your blood cells. Hemocytoblast. Now, what's cool about these guys is they're undifferentiated, which means they haven't turned into a particular cell. But these hemocytoblasts have the ability to create all three formed elements. Okay, the word they use is pluripotent. What that means is that the cells can become, if they're given the right hormones and right signaling molecules and right environment, these hemocytoblasts can become red blood cells, or they can become white blood cells, or they can become platelets. Okay, they actually don't become platelets; they become the cells that produce platelets. But from these stem cells, you can get all three formed elements. Is basically the main idea of the story. And so you got your hemocytoblasts, and then these substances get produced called colony stimulating factors, which sort of trigger the stem cells to become one of the types of the formed elements. You'll see it on a picture here in a second. So number 12, it says that blood stem cells are called hemocytoblasts. That's a definition. And they can differentiate into many types of cells. They can differentiate into red blood cells, white blood cells, or the guys who produce platelets. They're called megakaryocytes. And they're influenced by what's called colony stimulating factors. So let's kind of look at a picture here, what we're talking about. Let's blow this guy up right there. Okay, so up here at the top of this picture, you have your stem cell. All right. Now these guys are going to receive signals from the body depending on the situation. You know, if you need more red blood cells, then they can turn into red blood cells. And so what they'll do is these guys will turn into these stem cells right there, and they will become red blood cells by following this progression right down there. Or they can become platelets, you know, by basically becoming these cells down here called megakaryocytes, and then megakaryocytes can produce platelets. Or they might be stimulated to become the different types of white blood cells. So the moral of the story is that you can get all of these cells from this one original cell, okay? So they can differentiate or turn into whatever your body might need. Now, one of the things you see in this picture is something that's going to come into play here in a second, is that as a red blood cell is being created, okay, so here's red blood cell line right there. As a red blood cell is being created and it undergoes a maturation process, it loses all of its internal organelles. Okay, if you notice down here at the bottom, that's the actual red blood cell. By the time it reaches a red blood cell, it's lost its nucleus and it's lost all of its organelles, and that's why red blood cells are technically, by biological definition, red blood cells are technically not cells. They don't have a nucleus and they don't have organelles. As they go through the maturation process, those structures degrade and disappear, essentially. And so notice that this guy up here, this progenitor cell, has a nucleus, but as you follow it down during the maturation process, it'll lose its nucleus. Platelets are not cells. Okay? Platelets aren't even close to being a cell. They are pieces of cells. What this guy here does, he's called a megakaryocyte. When you produce a megakaryocyte, he'll start pinching off little pieces of his cytoplasm. And that's what a platelet is. A platelet is essentially fragments of a cell. So he's just pinching off little pieces. And so those first two guys there, by biological definition, are not technically cells, even though you'll hear them called blood cells. And even though in their official name, you'll see the word cyte. okay, because cyte means cells. For example, red blood cells are called erythrocytes. The cyte means cells. Another word for platelets is thrombocytes, but it's not really technically a cell. So when you talk about the formed elements, the only ones that are actual cells with nuclei and organelles are white blood cells, which are all these guys over in here. There's different types of white blood cells, and we're going to get into that, okay, here in just a minute. But all these guys down here at the bottom, your red blood cells, your platelets, and all of your different types of white blood cells originate from these stem cells up here, the hemocytoblasts. And then based on what colony stimulating factors that they receive, or it could be based on what hormones are produced that will cause them to shift to become one type or another. So it's got really good the ability, the variety that these cells can produce, these hemocytoblasts. Here is what I was talking about earlier, that you can actually subdivide hemopoiesis if you want to get more specific. You got erythropoiesis, which is the production of red blood cells. You got leukopoiesis, which is the production of white blood cells. And then you have thrombopoiesis, which is the production of platelets. Okay. So that's kind of the three prefixes you'll see a lot. If it's red blood cells, you'll see erythro. Okay. If it's white blood cells, you'll see leuko. And then if it's a platelet, if it's about platelets, it'll be thrombo. Thrombus is the fancy term for a blood clot. We're going to get into that here in just a little bit. So let's look at these guys individually. Okay, red blood cells first, and then we'll get into white blood cells, and then we'll talk a little bit about platelets and the whole idea behind blood clotting. So each of these different types of formed elements has a job to do in your body. Okay, erythrocytes, their job is to transport oxygen. That's their primary job. Okay, they're pretty small. They're not as big as white blood cells, so they're smaller in size. Notice the point number 2 right there. They lack a nucleus as a mature red blood cell. They lack a nucleus and they lack organelles. And this actually, A, helps it to do its job better, which is transport oxygen. But B, it also helps explain why red blood cells do not live very long. Okay, if you don't have a nucleus and if you don't have organelles, you can't repair yourself. And that's what aging is. Aging is kind of like the accumulation of damage over time. We all go through an aging process. All of our cells age to a point. But red blood cells just age quicker than other cells because they don't have the ability to repair themselves. And so we'll talk about that here in just a second. Their basic characteristics is they're small, they're flexible, they don't have a nucleus or other organelles, so there is no mitochondria, there is no ribosomes, there is no endoplasmic reticulum, all those cellular structures that we talked about last semester in AMP1. So they don't have any of that. What they have a lot of is this protein called hemoglobin. And so essentially, red blood cells are like a balloon, like a sac of hemoglobin. And hemoglobin is a protein. We'll look at him here in just a second. Hemoglobin is a protein that transports oxygen. And so you can kind of look at it like this. If your job is to transport one thing, then you want to get rid of everything else so you can be as good as you can at that one thing. And so by getting rid of the organelles and getting rid of the nucleus, that clears up more space for hemoglobin. And so you try to pack as much hemoglobin as possible into a red blood cell. I kind of look at it like when you're going on a trip. You know, you gotta transport clothes, right? And so you have suitcases. Whenever you go on a trip, the first thing you do before you pack your car, what's the first thing you do? You clean out your car first, right? You get rid of all the stuff that's not necessary. So you clear out your trunk first. And that gives you more room to pack what you want to take, right? Well, that's kind of what red blood cells do. They get rid of everything else that just takes up space. So that way they can pack as much hemoglobin as possible inside. of that red blood cell. I mean, here's the numbers again. Remember the number last week that 1 drop of blood can have 1.67 times 10 to the 23rd. So that's 1.67 and then 23 decimal points. The incredible carrying capacity. It's not letting Micah join the Zoom class. Is he in the wrong link? Maybe he went to the wrong link. Yeah, he might want to check that because everybody else is here. Let me see if I can. Did I not let him in? Maybe I haven't heard him like ding or anything. Check to see if he's at the right if you talk to him. But I have no way of talking to him unless I email him. But see if maybe he went to the wrong link. Maybe he went to the 11 o'clock link instead of the 1 o'clock. But back to the whole 1 drop of blood. So let's kind of do that math again. 1 drop of blood has about 5 to 6 million red blood cells. It can have, okay, and then it can have like something like 1.67 times 10 to the 23rd water molecules in 1 drop of blood. Crazy stuff like that. This is kind of the number we talked about last class. 1 drop of blood has about 5 million red blood cells. So let's just use that number. Each one of those red blood cells can have about 280 million hemoglobin molecules in it. And once again, it's hard to understand something that small can have that much in it. But that's the whole deal there. So 1 drop of blood can have 5 million red blood cells. And in every one of those 5 million red blood cells, there could be 280 million hemoglobin molecules. The numbers just get staggering. It just gets crazy. So we're going to talk about hemoglobin here in just a minute. So look at a red blood cell as just jam-packed with hemoglobin. And that's what makes it as good as it can possibly be at its job, which is to transport oxygen. Another thing that makes it really good at transporting oxygen is its shape, okay? This right here, whenever you have a substance that bends in on both sides, okay, they call that biconcave. Concave means it bends in, okay? This will be concave structure right there, okay, where it bends in. Biconcave, bi means 2, okay? Biconcave means it bends in on both sides. So both sides bend in, the biconcave shape. And that's actually what gives red blood cells that little divot that you see in the middle of a red blood cell. It's basically the surface is bent in. It's concave, okay? So concave, biconcave means bends in on both sides. Now what that does is it shortens the distance between the surface. Okay, you can see right there that it's a lot shorter distance. Oh, it's okay, Micah. So like look out here, the distance is a lot farther on the 2 ends than it is in the middle. Okay. Now what that does is that shortens the diffusion distance. That shortens the distance that oxygen has to travel to enter the red blood cell and exit the red blood cell. And so that biconcave shape allows it to very quickly pick up oxygen in the lungs and then drop off oxygen in the tissues, because that's what red blood cells have to do. They have to pick up oxygen in one place, take it somewhere else, and drop it off. And this unique shape they have allows them to do that quickly and efficiently. Okay, so the biconcave shape is another sort of anatomical characteristic that red blood cells have that make it as good as it can be at doing its job. Okay. Now notice what it says here, number 4 on 13A. It says capillaries are just wide enough to allow red blood cells through. So what happens is, as a red blood cell moves through a capillary bed, they kind of move through single file, like one right after another. They can't go in if you're a NASCAR fan, red blood cells can't travel through a capillary 2 wide or 3 wide. They have to kind of go in one after another. And that does a couple things. One, that makes sure that each red blood cell is able to drop off what it needs to and pick up what it needs to. But also, by going through single file, it's just like with people. By going through single file, it slows down the process because the capillaries is where the exchange takes place. So as red blood cells move through the capillary bed, it slows them down and it allows it to be more efficient at doing what it needs to do. Now they call that red blood cells tend to stack on each other, and it looks like a roll of quarters. Okay, so think about a roll of quarters. You can kind of see it down here in the picture. Is it looks like a stack of quarters, and they call that a rouleau. Okay, rouleau is French for roller or roll of quarters, stack of coins. Okay, so that's kind of what the word rouleau means: is stack of coins or a coin roll, a roller. So think about that. You know, if you've ever put quarters into a roll of quarters, that's kind of what red blood cells look like when they're traveling through a capillary bed. And in fact, there's actually some really cool pictures, videos that you can watch of capillary or of red blood cells moving through a capillary bed. And so you just go to YouTube. Let me pull up YouTube here. Get my little drop down box out of the way. And you go to YouTube and maybe you just search erythrocytes moving through a capillary bed. And you can find really cool pictures. That's a good thing for you guys is, here you go. I love this video right here. Okay. So right here is a capillary. And those capillaries are just wide enough to allow one red blood cell through at a time. And so you'll see the red blood cells moving through just one right after another in that single file. Okay, now this right here up there is a vein. So let's kind of draw that in here. Okay, this is a vein. And so what you see is this is the capillary here. You'll see the red blood cells moving through the capillary, and then they'll eventually make their way into the vein right here and then travel back towards the heart. And so let's play the video. But you can see the the single file movement of the red blood cells. So if we stop it, okay, this right here looks like a stack of coins, like a quarter stacked on top of each other. That's where the term rouleau comes from. And you can see that it's moving slower than this tissue up here because that's a wider vessel. So the wideness of the vessel also allows the red blood cells. Look how slow they're moving. Actually, that's a really good place to stop it right there. Look at that stack of coins right there. Okay, that's the rouleau. You guys can see my arrow, right? I'm not just, you can see my little arrow?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So right there, that's where they get the term rouleau from, the fact that it resembles a stack of coins right in that area there. So they move through one at a time, and it slows them down, and it allows them to efficiently drop off their oxygen and carbon dioxide. So you got that video there. You can actually, if you look closely, you can see more capillaries right in there. I really like that picture because it kind of shows you how they move through. Here's another one here. So this is a different video, but it'll show you the same deal. This is through a frog. After the word from our sponsor. A new show about the rock. So there you go. So you see how much slower? You see how much slower it has to move through the capillaries? So here, this will be an artery. Okay, this little part right there. The artery is feeding the blood into the capillary bed. And you can actually see 3 capillaries right here. And as the blood starts moving into there, you'll see the red blood cells have to go through basically one at a time, and it slows down the movement. And that way the red blood cells stay in the capillary bed for a longer period of time, and it allows it to drop off its oxygen. Really cool pictures. And then on the other side of the capillary bed will be what we saw a second ago, where the blood goes into the vein and then goes back. So all that, all this is just basically designed to help a red blood cell do its job efficiently, which is to pick up oxygen in the lungs. So the same thing in the capillaries in the lungs, it's going to be moving through really slowly, and that allows it to pick up as much oxygen as possible. And then as it moves through the tissues, it moves through slowly so it can drop off that oxygen to all the cells that need it. I mean, red blood cells have one of the most important jobs in the body, which is to transport oxygen, because every cell, go back to AMP1, every cell in the body needs oxygen to produce ATP through what we call aerobic respiration, except, ironically, red blood cells. Red blood cells are the only cells in the body that don't do aerobic respiration. They're the only cells in the body that don't need oxygen. How crazy is that? The one cell in the body that doesn't need oxygen is the cell that provides oxygen to everybody else. But why does it not need oxygen? No mitochondria. It doesn't have organelles. If you don't have mitochondria, you can't do aerobic respiration. So the only cells that do anaerobic exclusively, okay, yes, some cells can switch back and forth like muscles, but the only cells in the body that exclusively do anaerobic respiration is red blood cells. They're the only cells that don't need oxygen. Their job is to provide oxygen to everybody else. Now, they can transport some carbon dioxide, but we'll learn later in the semester, we'll learn that that's not the main way that we transport carbon dioxide in the blood. We actually convert it into bicarbonate and then transport it. So really the main job of red blood cells is oxygen. Pick it up in the lungs, take it to the tissues, and drop it off. There's the biconcave shape causing that little divot. There you see the rouleau inside a capillary bed, the stack of coins. Here's the protein that you associate with red blood cells. It's called hemoglobin. That's actually what gives blood its red appearance, and that's actually what gives red blood cells their red appearance. It's a pigmented protein, which means it has color to it. So hemoglobin is the red pigmented protein that makes red blood cells red and also makes your blood red in general. Now, when you're looking at him, he's actually made up of 4. So hemoglobin is the protein, but sometimes you have large proteins that are made up of smaller proteins put together. And that's what happens with hemoglobin. Hemoglobin can change color, and we talked about that before last class, that whenever blood is oxygenated, it's bright red. And whenever it's deoxygenated, it's dark red. That's because of hemoglobin. When hemoglobin is oxygenated, when it's attached to oxygen, it's bright red. And when it's deoxygenated, it's dark red. But when you look at the structure of hemoglobin, there's actually 4 subunits, 4 smaller proteins. And so hemoglobin is the big protein made up of sort of combining 4 smaller proteins. And we call those guys subunits. 2 of them are called alpha globin. So alpha globin is the smaller. Let's kind of look at right here. Let's blow this picture up a little bit. And so the entire protein is called hemoglobin, but it's actually made up of 4 smaller protein chains. 2 of them are called alpha globin. And on this picture, that's the 2 guys that are in the dark color. So this guy here and this guy here are called alpha globin. And then the other 2 protein subunits are called beta globin. So you got alpha globin and you got beta globin. Now, beta globin is the guy you hear about with sickle cell anemia. And we'll come back to that here in just a second, okay? People that have sickle cell anemia, they don't produce the beta globin chain in the correct length and the correct shape. And so that affects their overall ability to transport oxygen. So number 14, it says hemoglobin consists of 4 protein subunits 2 are called alpha globin, 2 are called beta globin. Each subunit, okay, so you got 4 subunits. Each subunit has an iron containing molecule called a heme group. Okay, it's spelled H-E-M-E, but it's pronounced heme. It's actually very similar to a word that is really popular now that has the same spelling and the same pronunciation. What am I thinking of? Come on, millennials.
Meme.
Meme. Yeah. And so there's a word we use a lot now that's spelled M-E-M-E, but we pronounce it meme. Okay. That's what's going on here. Okay. It's H-E-M-E, but it's pronounced heme. Okay. Heme group. Each subunit has a heme group. And in that heme group, right in the middle, you can see it up here at the top, right in the middle is the element iron. Okay. And that's why you hear about iron being important for blood health. Okay. That is what oxygen binds to. Oxygen is negatively charged. Iron is positively charged. Go back to AMP1, opposites attract, right? Well, hemoglobin gets this sort of shift that causes iron to latch on to oxygen. And so that's what oxygen binds to, is the iron. Now, one heme group can carry one O2, one oxygen. So, okay, each one of these guys can carry an oxygen. So what that means is that one hemoglobin, the whole thing, one hemoglobin can carry 4 oxygens because it has 4 heme groups. That's the way to look at it. And so it says there, each subunit has a heme group containing iron. Each heme group can bind to 1 oxygen. Okay. It actually can't bind. That's a mistake there. That's a typo. Okay, where it says it can bind to 1 oxygen and or carbon dioxide, that's actually a mistake on my part. Mark out that part about and or carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide does not bind to the heme group. Carbon dioxide actually binds to the protein subunit. So that is a mistake on my part. So basically the CO2 binds to the protein subunit. The heme group is where oxygen binds. So essentially they don't compete. That's the word we use. They don't compete for iron. So mark that out. That's a mistake. That's a 14C, the last part of it there. Now, if you look at it here, because they don't compete, oxygen binds to the heme group, carbon dioxide binds to the protein subunit. It binds to the globin chain. One hemoglobin can, if it had to, it can carry 4 oxygens and 4 carbon dioxides at the same time. But like I said earlier, that's not the main, transporting carbon dioxide is not the main job of hemoglobin. It can transport it if it needs to. And so that's what it says there. Carbon dioxide doesn't compete with oxygen for iron. Competition. Let's kind of talk about that for a second. Competition a lot of times happens in the body when you have a receptor and you have 2 substances. And if one substance binds to a receptor, that means the other one can't. All right. And we call that competition. And we use drugs and stuff that will bind to a receptor and block. Okay. But whenever you have competition, it means you have more than one thing competing for the same substance. All right. It might be a receptor. It might be a channel. It might be whatever. Okay. Iron, oxygen and carbon dioxide do not compete for iron. Oxygen binds to iron and CO2 will bind to the subunits. They don't compete. They don't butt heads with each other. However, there is a substance that does compete for iron with oxygen, and that's carbon monoxide. Okay, carbon monoxide, which is CO. Okay, so let's put oxygen here and carbon monoxide there. If carbon monoxide binds to iron, that means oxygen can't. All right, and that's where carbon monoxide poisoning comes in. If somebody inhales carbon monoxide, it's going to go into their red blood cells, and it's going to bind to the iron, and it's going to block oxygen. Okay, that's competition. Not only that, but carbon monoxide has a greater, what we call, affinity for the iron. And what that means is that not only will it bind to iron, but it won't let go. It'll stay stuck to it, okay, for a longer period of time. Oxygen, the oxygen binding to iron is kind of a weak deal. It'll bind, it'll let go when it needs to, it'll bind and detach and bind and detach whenever necessary. Carbon monoxide binds to iron and sticks to it. And so that hemoglobin can't transport both at the same time. If it's transporting CO, carbon monoxide, it can't transport oxygen. And when that happens, the cells in your body don't get oxygen. That causes the cells to die, which causes the tissues to die, which causes the organs to die. And so that's what happens with carbon monoxide poisoning, is eventually the person dies from organ failure. Now, the first cells to go are the nerves of the body, because nerves need a constant supply of oxygen. And so they can't store it, basically. And so if you cut off oxygen supply to a nerve, it dies very quickly. That's why if you cut off oxygen supply to the brain for more than a few seconds, like if you put somebody in a chokehold and you cut off the carotid artery, if you cut off blood flow to their brain for a few seconds, they can go unconscious. And so what happens a lot of times is somebody will breathe in carbon monoxide. It'll shut down their nerves. It'll shut down their brain. They'll pass out, and they'll keep breathing in the carbon monoxide. And then eventually it will cause all their organs to fail. Because if you can't get away from carbon monoxide, you're just going to keep continually breathing it in. And so that's what typically happens. It causes the person to pass out first, to go unconscious. And sometimes it can happen pretty quickly. You hear about people who don't even know that they're breathing in carbon monoxide, and the next second they're dead, basically. Like they go unconscious. A lot of times it happens when you're in an enclosed area where something is putting off exhaust, because there's depending on the exhaust, but there's a lot of carbon monoxide in exhaust, for example, from your car. And that's why around this time of year, and I actually saw an article in the paper today warning people about this time of year where it's so cold. If you have your car in an enclosed garage, you got to be careful about warming it up for too long, because a lot of times what people do is they go outside to their garage, they turn on the car, and they let it warm up. And as they're letting it warm up, that exhaust is building up in their garage. It has no place to go, and that exhaust will build up in their garage, and they'll be breathing in that carbon monoxide. And the next thing you know, they die of carbon monoxide poisoning. Also, the heaters that people will use when the power goes out. That was what the warning was for today. Was if the power goes out, be careful with your use of heaters, with portable heaters, which a lot of us do. I have kerosene heaters and stuff like that, or propane heaters. So I have propane heaters in my building, and when the power goes out, I bring them in and to keep warm a little bit. But you got to be careful, because a lot of those guys put off carbon monoxide, and so you're in an enclosed room trying to keep warm, and you got a heater running, and you're breathing in that carbon monoxide, and the next thing you know, you're unconscious and could possibly die from it. A lot of people die from carbon monoxide poisoning because it's odorless. You can't really detect it. Yes, you can have carbon monoxide detectors, but you can't see it, or you don't know what's happening. A lot of times the person gets lightheaded, they'll get short of breath, and that's kind of the cue that, hey, you need to get somewhere. You need to get fresh air. And so if you ever are in an enclosed place and you start to feel lightheaded and short of breath and shaky and things like that, get outside, to where you have fresh air. And a lot of times getting away from the source over time, it'll kind of help. It'll help replace your oxygen, because eventually carbon monoxide will let go. He just stays stuck to it for a long time. And a lot of times people don't even know it's happening, and the next thing you know, they're dead. Some people do use it for suicide, because it kind of a painless, yes, you get lightheaded, and you do get shortness of breath, and your chest may start hurting and that sort of thing, but it's a relatively painless way that people will tend to commit suicide. I'm not giving anybody any ideas. I'm just saying that it is commonly used. Car exhaust, feeding it into the roll up the windows. But you got to be careful with carbon monoxide. There was a story, it's been about 10 years now, but there was a hotel in South Charleston that in the middle of the night, the pull system broke. And it released carbon monoxide into the hotel, and a couple people died in their sleep from inhaling carbon monoxide. I think it was Holiday Inn, but in South Charleston. So if you look up, now it's been a while, so you may not be able to find a current article, obviously, but if you look up carbon monoxide poisoning hotel, South Charleston, West Virginia, you'll probably find an article about it. Wasn't too long ago, probably about less than 10 years ago.
I don't know if you remember that show with like those teenagers that was based in West Virginia like years ago.
Yeah.
Well, one of them died from going mudding, and his tailpipe got stuck with mud, and he died because he was drunk in the car.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I did hear about that. Yeah. The mud clogged up the exhaust pipe, and so
Buck Wild.
Yeah.
His name was Shane.
Yeah.
I remember reading about that.
Shane Gandy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the mud basically clogged up the exhaust. The exhaust had nowhere to go, so it backed up into the cab of the car. So basically, it went the other way. It couldn't go out the car, and so it backed up into the car. They were probably revving the engine, trying to get it out of the mud, and so that's going to also pump more exhaust in there. But it backed up into the cab, and killed them. Yeah, it's something you got to worry about. Once again, you want to be warm. The first thing you think when it's 30 degrees outside and the power goes out, the first thing you think is we need to get a heater in here to keep warm. It's just got to be careful with it. You can't keep it constantly pumping, and you can't keep it in an enclosed room, because that gas has to have somewhere to go, or else it's going to go into you and then cause these kind of issues with it. You hear about people with camping. They'll go into their tent, they'll take their propane heater or whatever into the tent, zip up the tent, and have that propane heater pumping all night, and it can cause them to breathe in a lot of carbon monoxide. You got to be careful. I heard a story, it's a horror story. I heard a story probably it's been about 3 years, but it was about this time of year, where a dad, he had his car in the garage. He went out there to warm it up. He took one of his kids out to the car, buckled him in, turned on the car, and got it to warm up, and then went back inside and got his other kid. And this is what they theorize happened because of the way everything went. But they basically found them in the garage. The dad was unconscious on the floor of the garage. One of his kids were there with him. The other kid was strapped in the car seat, all dead from carbon monoxide poisoning, because he let it run for too long. So stuff like that, it's something to think about. Exhaust, has a lot of carbon monoxide in it. That's the whole idea behind it, is the fact that it directly competes with iron, and so if it binds to iron, then oxygen can't, and that's what causes it. And then all your cells, that need oxygen, which is all of them, except for red blood cells, but all your cells that need oxygen can't get it. And the first cells to go is nerves, and that's what causes the unconsciousness and the tingling. And a lot of times when you have carbon monoxide poisoning, it causes tingling and stuff like that. That's your nerves basically dying. And like I said, you don't even know it's happening. So if you ever feel weird like that, if you're ever indoors and you start to feel weird, tingly, shortness of breath, lightheaded, dizzy, try to get outside because you may not even know it's happening. Okay. Number 16. Sorry, but you have another hormone that you have to worry about. So this is not one of your 21 hormones, but it's still a hormone that you should be aware of. And it is a hormone that I will ask you about on the first test. The good thing is, just like other hormones, right in its name is what it does. Okay, so if you know what the word poiesis means, then this hormone, it tells you in its name what it does. It's called erythropoietin. So this is the hormone, and its short version is EPO. Okay, erythropoietin controls the production of red blood cells. Now, just like the other hormones that you had to know, it has a trigger, it has a source, it has a target, and it has an effect. Okay, it's just not one of the 21 that are going to be on the quiz. But EPO, you hear about him with, you might use him in the hospital to boost red blood cell production. That happens. But you also hear about him with blood doping because he's used a lot to sort of cheat the system when it comes to endurance sports. Okay, but EPO, it's a hormone produced by the kidneys. Now the trigger is whenever your oxygen levels in your blood are low. Okay, the word we use is hypoxemia. Okay, hypo means low, ox means oxygen, emia means blood. So hypoxemia means low oxygen. And you hear that word a lot maybe in the hospital or medical shows and stuff like that. But hypoxemia, whenever you have low oxygen, it'll trigger your body to produce more red blood cells to try to make you as efficient as possible using oxygen. So it basically tries to boost your oxygen use or the efficiency of using your oxygen. For example, if there's not a lot of oxygen available, like if you're at high altitudes where there's less oxygen, that will stimulate more red blood cell production. Because the idea is there's less oxygen, so let's be as efficient as we can at using that oxygen. And so you produce more red blood cells. But the trigger is low oxygen in the blood. The source is the kidneys. So as blood's moving in through the kidneys, he's filtering your blood continuously all day long. And as blood's going into your kidneys to be filtered, you're checking it. You're checking its oxygen levels. And if it does notice that your oxygen levels are low, it releases the hormone EPO. And EPO goes to your bone marrow where you make your red blood cells, and it stimulates the production of red blood cells. And that's going to increase your blood's oxygen carrying capacity. It's going to make you better at using oxygen. And there is a few other things, like I said, that does influence EPO production and oxygen consumption and oxygen efficiency. One is testosterone, but also you have the environmental factors. What a lot of athletes do is they'll train at high altitudes. Okay, when you train at high altitudes, it boosts your red blood cell production. Then you come back down to sea level for the actual event, whatever the event might be. So you train where there's less oxygen, get your red blood cell production high, then you come back to sea level for the sporting event, and now you have an advantage over other athletes because you have more red blood cells to use the oxygen. So you see it a lot happen in endurance sports, is you'll see a lot of people train at high altitudes. So you have like the Olympic Training Center in Boulder, Colorado. There's a MMA training center in Big Bear Mountain in California. But basically they'll go up there and train at high altitudes to boost the red blood cell production. Now that's a way you can naturally boost your oxygen carrying capacity. And it's very important for endurance sports, okay? Because endurance sports, basically, the winner is the one who can last the longest without getting tired. So you're thinking like marathon, Tour de France bicycling, MMA. I mean, think about MMA fights. If you get tired, you're going to get beat. They call it gassing or just running out of gas. But basically, you might be a better fighter than the other person. But if you get tired first, you might lose that fight. And so the longer you can go without getting tired, the better, the better you are at that particular sport. Triathlons, all this stuff, these endurance sports. So here's what a lot of them do. A lot of endurance athletes will purposely inject themselves with EPO, and that boosts their red blood cell formation, makes them better at using oxygen. It gives them a competitive advantage. And it's actually banned. EPO, well, it can't be banned. EPO can't be banned because we produce it naturally. But they do test your EPO levels for a lot of athletic events because they have found that people will actually cheat by injecting themselves with EPO to boost the red blood cell production and make them better at endurance and using oxygen. So so in a lot of sports, they will do blood work, either prior to the event or after the event. And if your EPO levels are abnormally high, then they will suspect that you have been doping. And so it's one of those things that's weird because it is something you produce naturally. It's very similar to testosterone. Everybody's going to have a testosterone level. It's just, are your levels so high that it can't really be explained without cheating? Everybody's going to have EPO levels, but are your levels past that threshold that they deem that you can't get above that threshold without it being cheating? You've had to inject yourself with EPO. But that's what they kind of do. Well, this is interesting. I'll tell you, the bicyclist, I know Lance Armstrong's, it's been a while now. It's been a while since Lance Armstrong got busted, but you can watch videos about him. But he won like 7 straight Tour de France's. And what they found out later was everybody was cheating, not just him. He was just doing it better, or he already had he was already better than other people, but he was doing things to cheat basically. But everybody was cheating. But all the things they were doing, they were getting blood transfusions in between the stages, like in between the stages of the Tour de France. They were getting the old blood removed and replacing with new fresh blood because that's going to boost your EPO production and your red blood cell production. So they would get blood removed and blood transfusions, and then they would inject themselves with EPO. And that's actually what he got busted for. Is they would inject themselves with the EPO, and then put it into a pop can, like a soda can, walk off the bus and throw the pop can away, and nobody would know. You had to use a little insulin syringe, a little tiny syringe. They would basically inject themselves, put it in the pop can, walk off the bus, throw it away. Well, he apparently got somebody upset who knew that they were doing that. So after they went off the bus and threw it away, the guy just went behind him and grabbed the can, and inside the can was the syringe with his DNA on it. And that's when he finally went, yeah, I did it. So after years and years and years of saying I didn't cheat, I'll actually send you guys the Oprah video, because Oprah was the first time he said yes, it was me, I cheated, was on Oprah, because everybody goes to Oprah, right? But that was when he finally, he denied until the DNA evidence. They basically said, hey, we got a syringe, it's got EPO residue in it, it's got your DNA on the needle. Okay, now what do you got to say? That's when he was like, all right. He ended up admitting it. But it took forever for him to admit because he thought he was getting away with it without any evidence. And that's what finally linked him to it. But on the Oprah video, and I'll send it to you guys. But on the Oprah video, the first thing she asked him, because they kind of start the interview with, Oprah says, now we agree that I can ask you anything and you will be truthful. And he's like, yeah. First question she asked him was, did you cheat? Did you use performance enhancing drugs to cheat at the Tour de France or cycling or whatever? He said yes. The second question she asked him was one of those substances that you used EPO? So it was the second question she asked him, because that's what he got busted for. He was doing a lot of things, but the EPO was the one that he actually got busted for and tied to. And so that was the second question she asked him on that interview. The problem with using EPO is it does boost your red blood cell production, which is a solute. That means your blood's going to have more solutes in it. It's going to make your blood thicker, and that causes problems with, later on. It can cause strokes and heart attacks, cardiovascular disease. most of them didn't care. Most athletes would trade future health for current fame and fortune. They actually did a study one time. They asked a bunch of professional athletes in different sports, okay? But they asked a bunch of professional athletes, it was an anonymous survey, if you could cheat and not get caught, okay? So if you could cheat and become the best in the world at your sport for 10 years, but then you'll die shortly after those 10 years, would you do it? And like 67% said yes. So 60, like 2/3 of athletes said that they would cheat now to become the best in the world, even though they might die shortly afterwards. And I just, I mean, if you think about it, if you made that offer to me, I'd probably be like, no, because I'm not going to be, just random old Chuck who can't run faster than, a snail. But if you ask me if I would cheat to be, I'd probably go no, because I'm never going to be that good. But if you're a pro athlete, and the difference between first and second is a millisecond, or that a little tiny difference between being the best. I mean, you look at some of those Olympic events where the difference between first place, winning a gold medal, and not getting anything is like a half a second. They look for any possible advantage that they could get to be just a half second quicker, or a half second faster, or even 1,000th of a second faster. They look for any possible advantage. But yeah, I mean, these professional athletes, because you think about it, if you're the best at your sport for 10 years, that's fame and that's fortune. Your family's set for life. If you could be LeBron James for the past, all the millions and millions and millions of dollars that he's made off of endorsements and playing, your family, your kids, your grandkids, your great grandkids, and however long after that's going to be set, unless they screw it up, right? A lot of them will say, I will trade that. I will trade an early death to be as good as I can possibly be at my sport. So, but yeah, I'll send you that video where you can kind of listen to his. He also kind of explains why he did it. He basically said everybody's doing it. Everybody's doing it. So I didn't want to be left behind or whatever. So I decided to do it too, that sort of thing. But yeah, you always hear about every Olympics, you always hear about people cheating, always trying to get that little tiny edge that makes you go from second to first place, or from fourth place to a silver medal. Because that's another thing. If you win a gold medal, you're like a country's hero. Imagine being the hero for your country for a while. I mean, not so much here in America per se, but some countries, if you're a gold medalist, you're set for life. You're going to be their celebrity athlete for the rest of your life. He won the gold medal in 1964 or something. You know what I mean? So it really is a big deal, and people, the temptation's always there for people to cheat. And a lot of times they go from one thing to the next. With baseball, they got busted for steroids, anabolic steroids. They switched to HGH. They switched to growth hormone supplements. And so, when these endurance athletes got busted for one thing, and they moved to the next, and moved to the next, and moved to the next. What was one that I saw? Somehow with males, HCG, which is the pregnancy hormone. So the hormone that women produce when they're pregnant, the one that's tested with a pregnancy. We'll learn about him later, HCG. But the hormone that's tested with a pregnancy test, people are taking that hormone because it gives you some kind of advantage in sporting events. I haven't read too much about it, but it's like the new thing. You went from steroids to growth hormone to EPO. Now, there's always going to be something that people are going to do to try to get that edge, because that little half second could be the difference between you being a nobody. Tell me, who won fourth place the last Olympics in the 100-meter dash? Anybody? Who got fourth place? Nobody remembers. Who got the gold? That's who everybody remembers. Who won gold? Who won silver? Who won bronze? That's who people remember, especially the gold medalists. And the difference between fourth place and the gold medal could be literally 0.2 of a second between fourth and a gold. Right. Well, yeah, Kirsten, right. I can't even tell you who won. You're right. I think we're doing it too often, to be honest with you. All these Olympics and stuff. I mean, it's every 2 years now with the Winter Olympics and the Summer Olympics. But yeah, I mean, we tend to forget and move on from that. But yeah, I mean, it's still though people who just miss the podium, people who just miss, they just fade, and you never hear about them again. It's the people who win the gold and the silver and the bronze. If you come up with a medal, and if you've been working at it your whole, that's another thing to think about. If you've been working at it your whole life, blood, sweat, and tears, if you've done, if you've spent countless hours training, and let's say, and just think about this, if this is you, you've spent hundreds and thousands of hours and hundreds of thousands of dollars training since you were 5 years old. And right before the sporting event, you hear that the other person, your rival, is doping somehow. What do? You go tell the authorities, probably, or do you think, well, I need to also? That's kind of what happened with the Tour de France, is that there were so many people cheating that everybody was just like, well, everybody else is doing it. That was the same thing with steroids with baseball. They asked a bunch of athletes, why'd you choose to take steroids in baseball? Everybody else was doing it. Why should they get a competitive advantage and I don't? You know what I mean? So stuff like that. It's everybody has, if you're in those type of sporting events, and you got to think about that in my class, right? Are you going to cheat? Are you going to cheat or going to do it right? You know what I mean? Stuff like that, because the temptation's always there to try to get an advantage. You guys are going into competitive programs, where there might be 200 applicants for 20 spots, which means, 1 out of every 10 people gets selected. Are you going to do everything you can possibly do to be one of those people, one of those 20 that get picked? And where do you draw the line? So something for everybody to think about. This right here, we can stop right here after this is over, and we'll get into the leukocytes on Wednesday. But our body is wonderful, and this is not the only place where you get this. Your body is great at maximizing efficiency, maximizing resources. Our body definitely has that waste not, want not philosophy, where it just doesn't like to waste things. It'll reuse things when it can. It'll recycle things when it can. It'll come up with new uses for something that is no longer useful in another area. And that's kind of what happens with red blood cells. I love this story right here because it just shows you how efficient your body is and how good it is at just maximizing resources. Red blood cells don't live very long, okay? Now, you're making them all the time. I mean, if you think about it, they usually say you're making about 3 million red blood cells every few seconds. You're just cranking them out. Now, the reason why is because you have to remove that many from circulation because they don't live very long. So they get worn out pretty quickly. So their maximum lifespan is only about 4 months. So they live about 4 months. Once you produce them, they live about 4 months. And then they have to be removed from circulation because they're old and they're worn out. Now, the reason why they don't live very long is because they don't have any machinery to repair themselves. So they age very quickly. All your cells undergo damage. Just free radical damage, oxidative stress, which is the same thing really, wear and tear, just damage from just doing work. And you're always repairing damage in your body as well. But the accumulation of damage eventually wears on you. And as you move through life, the damage starts to outweigh the repair. And that's when you start really declining in your overall health, which starts at about your 30s. That's when you start really declining. You're not as fast as you was. You're not as strong as you was, things like that. And then it starts, the teeter-totter kind of flips, so to speak. But that accumulation is just a constant thing. And it just eventually wears on your body. And that's what aging is. Now, cellular aging, same deal. It's the accumulation of damage to your cells over time that causes them to not be as efficient as they could be. And eventually they get to the point where they're no longer useful. And when that happens, your body has to deal with them in some way. In the case of red blood cells, once those red blood cells are no longer useful for the transportation of oxygen, what you're going to do is you're going to remove them from circulation. And that's the job of the liver and the spleen. Okay, so the two organs that are responsible for removing red blood cells from circulation is your liver and spleen. Now, you're not done with them, though. Okay, you're not just going to destroy them and get rid of them, and that's all. Okay, so if you notice in number 17 on your notes, it says the lifespan of a red blood cell is about 120 days due to the fact that it doesn't have a nucleus and it doesn't have organelles, so it can't repair itself, which means it accumulates damage quickly and it ages quickly. Okay. And then number 18, old worn out cells are removed from circulation. Then it says millions of red blood cells are removed every minute and replaced with new fresh cells. Okay. Now, here's what you do with them. You take the red blood cell. You take the protein that is in the red blood cells. Okay. Think hemoglobin. Proteins are made up of amino acids. Okay. So you take the protein, you break it down into amino acids, and then you use them again. So you don't get rid of them, you don't destroy them, you just recycle them basically. You take the amino acids and you use them to make other proteins that your body needs. So it's kind of like a waste not, want not kind of deal. It can no longer serve its role as oxygen transporter, but you can use those parts again. So it's almost like scrapping, a car. You get the scraps from the car. There's still parts you can use, right? Just because a car no longer works doesn't mean the whole car is done. There's still some parts you can use. So you take that the red blood cell, you take the proteins, break it down into amino acids, and reuse those amino acids. You take the heme group, take the iron out, use it again. You can store iron in the liver. The liver has a lot of iron because it'll store iron. And then when you need to make more red blood cells, he can send the iron back to your red bone marrow and use it again. So you kind of reuse the iron. Then you're left with the rest of the heme group. So you take the heme group, take out the iron, and store it away and use it again. Then you got the rest of the heme group. What you're going to do is you're going to take it and you're going to convert it into what's called bilirubin. So the heme group becomes bilirubin. Now, bilirubin has sort of a yellowish green appearance to it. It's a pigmented protein. You put bilirubin into a substance that we call BIOL, which we talk about later. Now, your liver's going to do this. Your liver makes BIOL. You take the bilirubin, you put it into BIOL, and then you release BIOL into your small intestine to help you digest fat. And so actually, one of the components of BIOL was part of red blood cells. So this is kind of like a renewing or like a recycling, or where you use something for something else. Here you take the bilirubin, add it to bile, use bile to digest fat. It's a beautiful thing. You're not done with it yet. But here's what's interesting. So it's kind of like your body has to get rid of this bilirubin. Okay, if bilirubin builds up in your body, it causes jaundice. You all heard of jaundice before? That's a buildup of bilirubin. Okay, you got to get rid of it. So what you're going to do is you're going to poop it out. For lack of a better term, you're going to poop it out. But as you're pooping it out, let's use it to digest fat too. You're already going to be adding it to your GI tract, so why not add it and help use it to digest fat? So bile is going to get used to digest fat. You put it into the GI tract, and then eventually the bilirubin is going to exit in your feces. Along the way, though, okay, once it goes into your GI tract, it gets converted into another substance called urobilinogen. Now, urobilinogen has sort of like a yellowish amber color. Some of that urobilinogen is going to make its way to your kidneys and become urochrome, which gives your urine its yellowish color. So when you look at your pee and you see that yellowish color, that's actually red blood cells being excreted from your body. It's the heme group of your red blood cells. If the bilirubin stays in the GI tract, it'll get converted into urobilinogen, and then urobilinogen gets converted into stercobilin. Stercobilin has a brown color. and that's what makes your poop brown. So whenever you look at your poop, and whenever you look at your pee, and you see the typical color that you see, what you're actually seeing is red blood cells being removed from your body. It's like the parts that you couldn't use again, so to speak. And so, yeah, you use the protein again. Yeah, you use the iron, but you're going to have something that you're going to have to get rid of, and that becomes part of your pee and poop. It's just the way you get it out. I always just find it an interesting story. So number 19 says, what makes your poop brown and your urine yellow? The bilirubin created from the heme groups, it's added to bile, it's deposited into your small intestine, it helps you to digest fat. In the small intestine, enzymes converted into urobilinogen. Some of that urobilinogen is transported to the kidneys and adds the yellowish amber color to your urine. The rest of it stays in the GI tract and is converted into stercobilin, which is brown, and that's what comes out in your poop. So no matter what you eat, usually no matter what you eat, your poop comes out brown. Why? Because you're removing millions and millions and millions of red blood cells from circulation every day, and you get rid of that. You get rid of part of that by adding it to your feces, so to speak. And that's what gives it its brown color. That's also why when somebody has a bowel obstruction, it usually makes their poop clear or white or chalky in its color. So whenever your poop is not brown, that's usually an indicator that something may be wrong. And a lot of times a grayish, whitish, chalky looking stool lets you know that bowel wasn't added. Okay, because bowel is what gives it its brown color. So if you can't add bowel, then it doesn't get that nice brown color it's supposed to have. And so that's one of the telltale signs for a bowel obstruction is chalky poop, whitish, grayish, chalky poop. It all goes back to this story. I probably want to ask you a question about number 19. I just thought it was an interesting side story. So if your kids ever ask you, why is poop brown? Now you got a good, physiological reason why. You can just say, well, honey, what you're seeing there is the removal of red blood cells from circulation. It's got to go somewhere. So it comes out in your urine and it comes out in your poop. We'll stop there for today. It's a good place to stop talking about poop. We'll pick up with Luca. And the good thing about it, I'm fine right now with the pace we're going because our lab on Wednesday is about white blood cells. So it'd be good to finish the blood chapter on Wednesday and then go into the blood labs. So what that means is that the heart, we won't start on the heart till next week, but we'll cover the heart next week. And then the following week, you'll have your test. So the test is coming, okay? We'll use this week to finish up blood. Next week is all about the heart, and the following week will be your test. Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. The quiz, the hormone quiz, you just got to take it sometime between now and Sunday. It'll open up at 2:30 today. So you just go into the folder, and it's down at the bottom, and you take it whenever you want to. If you don't want to take it till Sunday, you can wait till Sunday. It's up to you. If you have any questions or any problems, though, let me know. Just holler at me, email me. Stay calm. Don't email me saying I'm freaking out. Just email me and just let me know what the deal is, and we'll fix it. Otherwise, we're good to go. Just bring your notes with you on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Thank you, Kirsten. Tate, you good?